Hi everyone and welcome. As you can see, I'm out here in my garden. I live in central Jersey and it's now mid-July. And the tomatoes are coming along good. Even the peppers are starting to show some nice signs of life. Flowers growing everywhere. Even some tomatoes that are close to getting ripe. So definitely looking forward to eating that first juicy tomato soon. But as you know, when we're out here in my garden, we're usually not out here talking about gardening. We're usually out here talking about some of my outdoor worm systems. And a recent development in my outdoor worm system, my outdoor worm bag, was that we emptied the container and we had processed all the materials through a sifter. We ended up with a container of really nice fine castings, which is probably also full of worm cocoons. But then there was also what had gotten caught within the sifter. All the large chunk materials that wasn't really broken down much anymore, as well as what was assumed to be a good number of the worms that were occupying the outdoor worm bag. And last time we checked on it, it was slipped down underneath the tabletop of my outdoor table to protect it from rain and stuff. So as you can see, I've switched over to protecting it from the rain with this piece of plywood versus having it under the tabletop. But the other weird thing that you might be noticing already as I pan out is that the container rests within a little pond, a moat, I think is the best way to think of it, because I got a little bit panicky. I came out here the other day. I started looking around to see how our baiting attempt was coming along. We had built a little bait bomb in here to try to draw the worms out of the material, so we could try to collect them. And you know, it seemed like it was looking okay for the most part. The one thing that didn't look okay though was the fact that there was a whole bunch of ants that seemed like they had discovered the system and were zooming in and out of the container, maybe taking some of that yummy bait that we had put out there to try to collect the worms with. And I wanted to put a stop to that as quickly as possible. And since the system had only been out here for a couple days, it seemed like hopefully the ants hadn't really made themselves too at home yet, or God forbid built themselves a nest. But you know what, I'm a little bit distracted because what I see over here is something definitely worth mentioning. Over here in the corner of the bin is something that kind of has like the appearance of a big scary wasp or something, but you know what that is? That's a black soldier fly. And they're really docile. You could come right up to one of these little guys, you could pet the thing and it wouldn't fly away. Black soldier flies, you know, they don't even have mouth parts, they don't eat. They turn into a fly, they mate, and they die. So they're not about living and surviving and nesting and all that other stuff. They're just about reproduction. And usually I consider black soldier flies to be a welcome guest in my systems. But we're not going to worry too much about the black soldier fly. I just figured I'd make mention of the fact that we had one over here sitting in our system. They're usually attracted to the corrugated cardboard. They like the fact that the cardboard has these little openings in it, the little places that they could put their eggs into. So, you know, I feel bad for this little black soldier fly. If he's already laid his eggs into here, or she's laid its eggs into here, this is not really going to be much of a place to try to rear your next generation of black soldier flies, because I'm pretty much dismantling the system today. Rather than sitting around waiting for worms to be attracted to the bait that I had set out here for them a few days ago, I've decided that I'm going to opt for trying to just pull the worms out of this system using a somewhat more tedious but possibly a more effective method to get the worms out of here, which is a system where you simply use the overhead light that's shining down into the bin to cause the natural reaction of the worms to dive down into the material. And as you start skimming away layers and layers of the material from the top, what you're ultimately left with at the end is the worms that have continued to burrow down. So I've decided that I'm just going to try to do a light separation of the worms from the material that they're inhabiting, and not wait for them to all come around and, you know, get rounded up in this bait bomb over here. You know, when it comes to the black soldier flies, I always wonder sometimes, you know, when I see a black soldier fly, I sometimes wonder, is it one that was hatched right here? Did it come out of this little shell or whatever that it I guess what used to be its skin when it was still a larvae. I mean, did it sit in here all winter long and it just finally warmed up enough to sort of resume its pupation into a fly? And did it just crawl out of one of these little husks? Or did it fly over here from elsewhere? I don't know. But you know what? I think I'm going to grab this little guy. And I consider these little guys to be welcome guests, like I said earlier. But since this is not really a place where this fly is going to be able to do much good, I believe I'm just going to take this little guy and carry him over to my compost barrel. And that's really where I'd prefer to have my black soldier flies hanging out, helping to break down the materials in the bin. And I've already noticed in this system that the black soldier fly larvae are already hard at work breaking down the materials in this system over here. So this little guy is probably just looking for a mate, and hopefully it'll be able to find one in here. So let's just eject them off my hand. And they have the ability to fly, but they'll probably just stay put in there. Hopefully I haven't disturbed the poor little guy so much that they're, you know, now startled and feel like they need to flee. I'd rather just have the little guy remain here and hopefully spawn off the next generation of BSFs here in my compost barrel. Alright, so let's get back to my processing of the material that came out of my outdoor worm bag. So I've taken a few minutes here to reorganize things a little bit. I've got a pot here that I'm going to be dumping all the material into as I start to skim it off the top. Got my glove on, so I'm ready to work. And I think before we get started, we're going to go ahead and extract this little bait bomb that we created. I did go probing through it earlier. I kind of came to the determination that there were pretty much no worms congregating within it. I mean, if there are a couple, there, you know, I'm not saying absolutely none, but for the most part it seemed like there were none in here. And the one thing I did notice when I did come over here was that a good number of them were satisfied just to be hanging out down right below it, kind of enjoying all of the juices that were seeping out of the strawberries and the different yummy stuff that we had placed in here for them. So I figured if I could just, you know, get rid of the few worms that were just sort of hanging out on the bottom of the bag, then we will have kind of achieved part of what the bait bomb was meant to do, which was to, you know, attract the worms to a single spot for the purposes of gathering them. But I'm pretty much convinced that very few, if any, have made their way actually down into the container. And maybe if we had left it sit for a week or so, maybe they would have eventually made their way into the bag. But it seems to me like they were perfectly content just to come and sip up the delicious strawberry juice that was pouring out of the strawberry, and there was a tomato in here too. So the tomato and strawberry juices were, you know, kind of coming out of the fruits that were placed into this little bait contraption, and that the worms were just, you know, just as happy to be right there below it and didn't feel really compelled to go trying to get into it. So I think just to make my point, you know, because I did go probing through here a couple times already on a few occasions looking for even one worm that has made its way into here, and I had no luck finding even one worm, you know. So you can see some of the leftovers of the strawberry that was put in here. The tomato is probably in here too, right there. But, you know, no signs of worms, so I'm not too concerned about, you know, kind of putting this aside and not achieving the collection of any worms as a result of not having this. This will just go right into my outdoor compost barrel, I believe, as is. It'll be a nice little treat for the inhabitants of that container. So I think that enables us to proceed with the sifting of this material. And it's not even sifting, so to speak. In a way it is. I'm just going to make my way over to this other side of the table because I'll be working over here using my left hand to scoop away material off the top surface and dump it into this container here. But since it's going to be a fairly time-consuming effort, my idea was to switch over to time-lapse mode, and then hopefully we'll be able to watch about 1 minute worth of actual activity played back over the course of just 1 second in fast playback when the time-lapse is played back. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to switch the camera over to time-lapse. There will be no audio, and we'll just gradually start making our way through this material, skimming away all the large chunk stuff, giving the worms a chance to settle down into the material, repelled by the bright light of the daytime overhead. And at the end, hopefully we'll have ourselves a nice little ball of worms here that we can use to launch off my other bin that's inside waiting for them. So I'm going to switch over to time-lapse now, and we're going to get started. So I figured I'd switch back to video mode for a moment just to talk about the mango seed. The mango seed had already been infiltrated. There was a hole in it, so a lot of worms had made their way in, taking advantage of, I don't know what they really like about it, maybe the seed itself, maybe the husk itself. But I believe I did manage to fish out the majority of them. So this will just go out with the rest of this stuff. But I've been putting stuff down here in the middle that I intend to try to work my way around, including the cork. I didn't stop the time-lapse for the cork. I just figured I'd touch on that really quickly before we continued. And a lot of the worms that I found within the mango seed were little baby worms, little ones, little tucked inside that seed. But I don't expect to find a lot of little worms, because, you know, when I did the screening a few days ago, 5 days ago, I did assume that any worms that are about this size, like this little guy right here, you know, like the ones that we found within the mango seed, I did kind of assume that the majority of them went with the fine sifted materials, with the castings down into the other container. So I'm kind of working on the assumption that I'm gonna not have to be so careful looking through this material for little baby worms, with the assumption that the most of them are not really in here. If I do pick up a worm, it's going to be assumed to be a pretty good sized one that I'm going to spot pretty easily, and then remove it before I discard the material that they're inhabiting. So, all right, continue with the sifting. Back to time lapse. So now this object right here is clearly the stem of a pumpkin of some sort, because I don't really have any other sort of stuff that comes and goes through my kitchen that has stems of this size. It's usually only a pumpkin from the Halloween time frame that has a stem like this. And it even makes me wonder if this could be the stem of one of the pumpkins that was in one of the time-lapse bins at some point. Because for a while we were, you know, tracking stuff like the cork, but for a while we were also tracking a pumpkin stem, and it makes me wonder if this could be actually one of the pumpkin stems. No, I don't think it is, but still seemed like an interesting object to bump into. So, all right, let's continue. Oh, the other thing I've been seeing a lot of in here is cocoons. Lots of cocoons. So all this stuff that I've been piling up in this pot over here, I'm actually thinking I might run that through the screen one more time just to separate all the nice castings that's now kind of breaking loose from all this large chunk material, and maybe with that collect a bunch of cocoons too, which will also sift through the screen with the castings. And I'm getting pretty close to being full with this pot over here too. It might be time to find myself another container to continue this with. So as you saw what I did there, I was kind of getting to the point where I was actually hitting bottom. I didn't realize I was so close to the bottom. And then I started getting little sneak previews of pockets of worms here and there. So I figured maybe I would start mounding the material up a little bit. And then by doing so, I knew I had uncovered a bunch of worms. I figured I'd give them a few minutes to start diving down. And I think that there's probably still quite a few right near the surface. So before I start skimming again, I figured I would just touch really quickly on these peanut shells. The one thing that I never really paid much attention to was the peanut shells. But each peanut shell seems like it's a little tiny compartment into which a good amount of, you know, possibly food items could have gotten stuck, creating this little tiny shelter. And on a couple occasions I would find a peanut shell and just sort of crack it open. You might have noticed it here and there. And by doing so, I would actually reveal a number of worms right there within each of these, not each of them, but within a number of these. Some of them have inhabitants, some of them don't. So it almost made me start to wonder, hey, do I want to start cracking these shells open just in case there's, you know, some of them might have a whole bunch of worms hanging out inside of them. I guess I could, maybe a little bit, but you know, it seems like it would take a lot of time to do so. Just an interesting thing, because I didn't really ever pay much attention to the peanut shells, and I never thought that they would have very much interest to the worms. But on a couple occasions I just started cracking them open and noticing that the stuff that was coming out of them was not just some compost, but in many occasions a whole bunch of little worms coming out of the shells too. Here and there I might just crack one open, see what I can find. Now I think we can kind of resume the skimming of the top surface material here and keep out what we had started here. So let's get back to the time lapse. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, at this size it could be hard to tell. I could be mistaken, but who knows? This could very well be a black soldier fly larvae. And, you know, that's the one thing I don't want to have commingled with my worms. I don't want to have any sort of flying insects occupying any of the bins that I have down in my wormery. And since these worms that we're recruiting right now are destined to hopefully make it into my wormery someday, it's these little guys that I definitely don't mind having over in my compost barrel, but I just don't want to have you know, living in my basement. So I'm going to I think I'm just going to go ahead and put this little guy over with the actual fly that we found earlier in my compost barrel, and then we'll return to what we were working on. So as this mound keeps getting smaller and smaller, and I keep skimming off layer and layer of material, I do find it much more difficult to, you know, pull out material that is worm-free. There's just more and more little worms hanging out in the stuff, and even large worms, little pockets of larger worms. So every now and then I do wonder if I'm getting really close to the bottom. I do sort of probe aside a little mound of material, and then all of a sudden I get a little sneak preview of a whole bunch of worms hanging out, which is kind of cool. So I do feel like we're getting close. So I guess we'll probably try to go one more round of just skimming material off the side, picking out any worms we could spot in the process. But right here, as I pull back a little bit of the material, I could just see a huge pile of worms hanging out there, all kind of squirming their way inwards, trying to get away from the light out here, trying to get away from my pesky hand that keeps trying to skim off more and more of the material that they're inhabiting. I'm just kind of talking out loud here a little bit, but I think we're getting really close to the reveal here, which is going to be kind of cool, I think, because there seems to be a good number of worms hanging out over here. Alright, so let's switch back to time lapse here so we can resume our collection of materials. We want to skim it just a little bit more. Maybe we'll skim just a little bit more, see what else we can get. We're getting there. Definitely getting there. Well, I think we're, oops, I think we're definitely approaching that point where it's just becoming very, very difficult to keep the bin still. You can see as I'm working, I keep moving the whole bin around. But no, that's not really what I was going to say. I was going to say it's getting to the point where it is very difficult anymore to skim material off this mound without hitting a big, huge pile of worms. So my thought was to maybe skim a little bit, kind of a worm reveal. Because it did feel to me like I was just right there at the edge of having my worm ball, and I just want to see it. I want to just peel back all this stuff that they've been squirming down and out of for the past, I don't know how long I've been at this. And you know, here too, here's another example of kind of what I was hoping not to bring indoors. I believe this is just another black soldier fly larvae, which I'm going to carry over to the compost barrel and put it in there. And I suppose it will be easy enough to spot them because they are way different looking. But I'm just thinking if there's a very small one, you know, mixed in here, I'm going to miss it. And then over time I'm going to have black soldier flies emerging from a worm bin. And I just don't want to have that happening inside. So let me go run this little guy over to the outside compost barrel. And then I'll be right back. I figured I'd let that just go for a few minutes just to see what the result would be. And I believe we see another black soldier fly larvae here. I think they're just a little bit more tolerant of the bright lights than the worms are. So the worms keep squirming down, and this little guy gets kind of left out on the top surface. I'll move this little guy back over into the compost barrel as well. But, you know, I don't know, I'm starting to feel like I'm stalling because I'm not exactly sure where to take this next. I do have that bin down in the basement that I built for them, something in the neighborhood of about 16 or 17 days ago at this point. I know it was over 2 weeks ago. So the bin was set up with some nice bedding, and I even grabbed some of the vermicompost that was in this outdoor worm system to prime that container with. I threw some food in there, which I would think after 2 weeks or more now is probably just a bunch of goo. But I'm looking around here and I'm just a little bit worried about some of the worms that are kind of stranded. The ones that are here in this big pile in the middle, they're probably okay with regards to, you know, moisture, even though they're kind of spewing all this kind of spit or whatever. They're kind of sliming their way down into this pile here, leaving this foam behind. But it's all these little guys out here on the edge that I wanted to make sure I get them all back into the pile. I don't want to have any of them stranded out in a place where they're going to possibly dry up. But the humidity is going down, so the air is getting drier. And I would hate to think that a worm would kind of get stranded out here in the dry. So I want to make sure that they're all in some sort of a safe pile where they're not at risk of drying out. I don't know. I'm still kind of torn on where to take this. But I am sort of leaning towards releasing this mound of worms into the bin that I had built for them. Maybe just leaving it in the garage. I just wish I could come up with some sort of a solution keeping them outside here. But I just worry about some sort of insects invading the container. Because I do want to eventually transform this collection of worms into an indoor bin of red wigglers. But I want to sort of take my time and do it in such a way that I feel really confident that I'm not, you know, bringing inside with them a whole bunch of undesirable pests. So, decisions. It does seem to make good sense to just go grab that bin and release these little guys into there. I mean, one other thing that I had thought about doing, something that one of my viewers even suggested, was to sort of expose this pile of worms to an environment that they'd be able to withstand, but other creatures would not be able to withstand. I guess more specifically, basically dropping these worms right into a bucket of nice clean water, maybe some rainwater or something, because worms will do just fine submerged in water. I think I was under the impression that they could go days being submerged in water, as long as I guess the water has enough oxygen in it to sustain them, because the worms breathe through their skin. They don't have lungs, and they do extract the oxygen that they need from liquids. That's why they need to remain in nice damp material all the time. And being submerged is something that they could totally withstand for a while. But if there was any creatures in here, ants, maybe even these black soldier fly larvae, I'm not sure, they might, need to surface, and then I could maybe use that as a means to separate them and to make sure that what I'm left with is purely worms and nothing else. Look at that. I just don't want, black soldier flies in my worm bins. I don't mind having the black soldier flies outside, but I don't want them in my worm bins. So let me go take these little guys back over to my compost barrel, and I'm going to just chew on this a little bit longer, figure out what I want to do. Oops. So let's shoot a little more time lapse of this worm ball, because that's always fun to watch. Let's do that. Oops. Another black soldier fly larvae carcass. Well, that was quite a long pause. It was about 15 minutes that I just kind of sat here kind of watching what the worms were doing, but also just pondering, what the heck am I going to do? I'm really kind of torn on what to do here next. So I think I've got kind of a straw man here in terms of what to do. I guess number one, I've already expressed my concerns about simply taking all this stuff right down into the basement. It's something I just don't feel comfortable doing. But I definitely want to keep this as an isolated population of worms, because I could tell that these are red wigglers, and I want red wigglers in my wormery again, and here they are. It's just a matter of somehow quarantining them in a way that I can assure myself that when the time comes to actually introduce them back into my wormery, or down into my wormery, I'm not sure if it's back into my wormery, that I'm not also introducing all kinds of other weird stuff down into my basement. So my idea was to take the bin that I had built for them 2.5 weeks ago, with all that nicely pre-built compost and primed bedding, and it's not compost, it's just nice primed bedding, I guess, with even some food that had been in there all those weeks now, kind of decomposing and breaking down nicely, probably preparing for, to be a nice, easy to eat meal for them once they get into that bin. But maybe not actually put them in that bin, but rather use some of the material from that bin. Lots of people have suggested that it would be wise to have some sort of bedding on demand, in case you ever find yourself in the need suddenly for some nice good bedding for a worm bin, maybe an impromptu bin that you didn't think you needed to build, and just be able to just use that stuff right away. So in a way, since I'd already built these little guys a home all that time ago, I could sort of treat that material as sort of pre-built bedding that I could use for different purposes. But I figured I would use half of it, placed into a slightly smaller container, to be able to house these guys in for a little while. And then I thought maybe just, like I might have mentioned earlier, keeping them in the garage, or just keeping them someplace where I know that ants aren't going to be able to get to them or anything like that. And if at some point I missed some of these tiny black soldier fly larvae and any of these kind of develop into a fly, and that if this little temporary quarantine container that I put them into suddenly starts having flies emerge from it, that, you know, at least I'm someplace that's not inside the house. I'm still trying to decide how to best to play this whole thing. I don't know, but it does seem like grabbing a small container into which to place a portion of the material that I had built for these guys, so that I could release them and just get them out of this kind of anxious state that they're in, because they keep running out of material to be in, because I keep skimming it away and moving it away. And you can even see some of them are just kind of running now. They're just running away from the pile, trying to find something a little bit more hospitable. And gosh, if they do that, they're just going to end up dried out somewhere, and I don't want to have that happen either. So I think the best thing for me to do is to head downstairs. I'll take half of the material that's in the bin that I had built for these little guys, place it into a small temporary container that we can release them into, and then I'll have a little bit more time to ponder exactly how I want to play the next steps. But chances are I'll probably keep that quarantine container perhaps in the garage. I don't know, I'm even thinking perhaps somewhere outside where it's safe from ants crawling into it or some other sort of creature trying to make its home in it. But that's something I could figure out later. I think the most pressing need right now is to get these little guys situated someplace where they're not in this sort of panic mode, where they're not spewing all this goo. They're not all trying to just run away from the pile that they're in. I mean, perhaps I should even cover them with a piece of paper temporarily, just so they're not freaking out. I'm just wondering if there's any other black soldier fly larvae that I could very easily scoop out of this pile here. I don't see any more. There's so many little tiny baby worms, like the size of a eyelash. Very easy to miss. I just hate the idea of a worm squirming out of here and ending up dried to the side of the container somewhere, because it just couldn't stand being here in this pile any longer. So rather than trying to create more eye candy and create another time lapse of these poor little guys squirming and struggling, I think I'm going to grab a piece of paper just to cover them up with. Hopefully that's enough to quell them for a few minutes so they don't try to run away, because at least they'll be in darkness and they won't feel the need to try to escape the bright overhead daylight, which is something that's probably just driving them bananas right now. So let's grab a piece of paper. I'm going to rest that right in here. Maybe I'll even fold it in half so it's definitely creating some darkness for them. Hopefully the wind doesn't blow it away. I think it's pretty well sheltered down here within the bin. And I think it's time for me to head downstairs and try to transplant some of that bedding from the bin that I built for them into a temporary container. Then I think we could proceed to releasing these little guys into a temporary quarantine space that they could live in for a while. I'm just still debating whether I should maybe give the submerging them underwater technique a try before I do that, just to sort of give myself a little peace of mind that I've sort of screened out any undesirable creatures from the pile of worms. I'm going to give that a few moments thought too, so for now it's break time. Okay, so we've moved into the shady spot over here, and I've set up a bunch of the things that I'd like to use for the next few steps. So number one, we're here with the container that's got the worms in it, sheltered from the light with this piece of newspaper. And the other stuff that you see around us here This crazy Mickey Mouse looking thing is a scale. And I've got this little container here, which I figured we could do the bathing of the worms in. And we could also do the weighing of the worms in here as well. So before adding the water, I thought we would throw the worms in here, put them on the scale, and then we'll know how many worms we've got left. So now all this stuff over on this side is here's the bin that I made reference to earlier, the bin that I had built in advance for the worms to be moved into. I've got just a bag of some extra bedding here, shredded paper. And here's the smaller size container that I'd like to put the worms into temporarily as their quarantine home up until we can get them moved into their regular space. So I figured weigh them, put them into the container and weigh them, put in the water. So I've got some water right over here that we could use for that purpose over there to give them a little bath. And then by weighing them, we'll also have a rough idea of how many worms we're talking about. And then while they're sitting in their little water bath for a while, soaking, hopefully helping us separate any sort of creatures that are unwanted, I'll have a few minutes to put this together. I'll just use some of this nicely primed, aged bedding and stuff to assemble their temporary home. So let's see, how do we begin? I guess number one is let's position the camera a little bit closer over here so we could see what's happening as we scoop the worms out of the container that they're in now and move them over into this temporary holding container. Okay, I don't think we have any stuck to the paper. At least it doesn't seem that way. So we'll set the paper aside, and I guess we could even exclude some of this gook here, because that doesn't really register as worms, it's just gook that they were occupying. It definitely has some worms left in it, so maybe it's not so important to separate it. I think we'll factor in a little bit of error into the weighing of the worms here, assuming that, you know, we're not dealing only with worms here, but maybe a little bit of the material that they were inhabiting. I did put this on the scale earlier. It's 3.5 ounces and 0.1 kilograms. I'm definitely not a metric person. But I think once we put them into this container and we weigh them, we'll be able to get a better sense of how many worms we think we've got here. So I'm just curious. I wonder if anyone's got a good guess before we actually put it on the scale in terms of how many worms we're dealing with here. I don't know. It's hard to say. So let's get them over into this container here. Try not to leave any behind. So we've got a couple here and there. Not too many left behind. Got the majority of them with that one felt swoop in the beginning, luckily. Got one or two in my glove as well. I'm always trying to make sure I don't have worms stuck to my glove, because then they'll drop off someplace where they just don't want to be, and then they'll be in trouble. So these one or two little baby worms are certainly not going to tip the scale on any sort of significant difference in the reading that we're going to get here. So I can always come back to this and make sure we didn't leave any babies left behind. And I'm kind of guessing at this point, whatever worms are left in this little pile here, they can probably just go back with the skimmed material that we stacked up in those two pots earlier. I want to see what we've got going on over here. So let's bring the camera back over to get view of the scale, like so. And let's turn it back on. Let's see what we're left with. 0.45, and then I guess we'd be subtracting 0.1, I believe, is what the weight of the container alone was. So it's 0.35, and then we could switch over to that's 1 pound minus the 3.5 ounces. So we're talking about a quarter pound. Remove a quarter pound from a pound, so it's a little bit over 3/4 of a pound, especially if we're factoring in a little bit of wiggle room for this stuff over here, right? So Maybe not quite as many as I thought we would have. I was kind of hoping for a pound, but 3/4 of a pound is certainly a nice number. And a lot of times people will equate 1 pound of worms to about 1,000. But I mean, since there are so many little worms in here, I think there are quite a lot of little baby worms in here mixed in with the adult worms. I've got no problem estimating this to be 1,000 worms. So let me know if you agree. Okay, so I guess the bathing of the worms is going to follow. So let me rearrange things here and get the scale out of the way since we don't need that anymore. Maybe I'll even get rid of this material here. I'm just wondering if we want to hang on to the cork. Do we keep the cork with the worms? Should we? Sure, why not? Can't resist. Maybe even this little stem. Just kind of a couple novelty items, right? But I'll get rid of this, we'll get rid of the scale, and then we'll proceed to giving these little guys a bath. See, these worms just keep spewing out this white mucus. That's one of the signs that they're not having a good time. So hopefully we can kind of get them through this strenuous move out of their old space into their new space and get it done soon so we can put an end to all this torture that we're putting them through. Figured if we're going to give stuff a bath, let's not give the cork a bath. And we're going to just take this pumpkin stem out of here too. That stuff could stay dirty, I don't care. And hopefully this does not end up causing problems. This is the first time I've ever tried giving worms a bath. So here goes nothing. Keeping my fingers crossed. My hope is that what we end up with is some stuff floating to the top that we can easily pick out and exclude. And then at the end, just move over the nice clean bathed worms into their new home. It does seem like the worms are sticking to the bottom, and all the mucus that they spewed out is kind of floating to the top. So it does almost seem like we could even skim off some of this mucus and get that out of here. But it does seem like if I could just get some of this stuff out of here, minus any worms, we'll have somewhat cleaner stuff to deal with here, and also a better view of what's going on. Nice to have my watering can right here that I can rinse my hand off with immediately. And I'm just trying to see if, for example, are there any black soldier fly larvae floating to the surface? Is that one possible thing that we could be benefiting from here by giving these guys a bath? I'm not sure. So now I do see a black soldier fly larvae down there in the water amongst the worms. So I kind of hope that I was hoping that these little guys would just float to the surface and that I'd be able to pick them all out at once, but that doesn't seem to be the case. They're sinking right down to the bottom with the wormies. So this is not really an opportunity to separate the black soldier fly larvae from the worms, unfortunately. Alright, so I took that black soldier fly larvae over to the compost barrel. I guess if we encounter any other ones and we're able to fish them out, then we'll take them over there too. But since we've already found maybe half a dozen or more of them, I've got to assume that there's plenty more in here, and some of them are probably so small still that there's just no way to spot them or extract them. So I think one safe assumption with this stuff is that there probably are black soldier fly larvae mixed in with them. And they're just going to need some time to grow and maybe mature to the point where we can start pulling them out or something. I don't know. I'm not sure how to play that yet, but we'll see when we get there, I suppose. And I just figured I'd give this stuff a stir to try to dislodge any other sort of stuff that might be kind of mixed into the middle of them. See if I could see anything else in here that looks like it would be something that we would want to try to skim out and scoop out. I guess we could just try to grab another handful of this mucusy stuff. Some of these castings that came along for the ride, we could scoop them out too. So it just doesn't seem like the worms are going to be bothered too much by being in this water. So we'll let them sit here for a moment and we'll take care of setting up their new home for them. Okay, so this is the container that they're going to be moved into, and before we take some of that nice aged material that we're going to salvage from that container that we built for these little guys, maybe not salvage, but rather kind of hijacking it, we're going to borrow some. I figured I'd take some of this nice loose fresh bedding, some shredded paper, lay it down here underneath, kind of help build out the space that we're creating for them. We'll set those aside, and there's just a whole bunch of nice leafy material in here. You can see some of it's already becoming a little bit moldy. And probably, yeah, there's probably a bunch of cardboard down here too that I used to build this container out of. So I think I'm just going to start dumping some of what's in here over. Some nice aged leaves, some nice aged paper, some nice aged cardboard. I don't think we need a whole lot. There's even some nice kind of fluids collected on the bottom here. I got some paper tubes, a variety of different types of interesting materials for them to enjoy. I mean, there's even some fluid collecting on the bottom of here. Maybe we'll even pour some of that off. Ooh, is it coming off? Yeah, pouring out a little bit. We'll leave the rest of it in here. Don't want to drop anything. I guess we could probably go with maybe one more handful of stuff out of here. And I think that, you know, the new stuff combined with the old stuff should make for a pretty cozy home for these little guys. So, I think we've created a pretty decent little home for these guys. At least a temporary home until we can upgrade them into something larger, until we can get them into this larger bin. And then I guess I'll just backfill the remainder of this emptied space that I took the material out of with some fresh bedding, and let that container just continue aging up until such a time that we can get the worms situated in there. So, you know, at this point I think I'm going to drain off the water, and we're going to just let these little guys loose, let them loose in their new home, because they've been through a lot. I think it's time to give them a break. I'm sure you'll agree. So let's get them rinsed and released. Well, it's my hope that I can pour off this water without losing too many worms. I mean, most of them are near the bottom, right? A couple of them are floating, it seems. Maybe I can just kind of create a little dam here, and maybe maybe I can hold back any worms that might otherwise get washed out with the flow of the water. Be happy for the worms. The worms that get set free as a result of this, just be happy for them that they get to live out in nature instead of being cooped up, working for me, working for the man. I guess we're gradually getting there. So it does seem like we've got ourselves the majority of the water out of the container. Let's see what we could do in terms of getting most of it out, if not all of it out. I guess if there's a little bit of water kind of mixed in with the worms, that'll just go into the bin, and it'll kind of create a little puddle on the bottom of the bin for a little while. It'll just eventually work its way out of the container, I'm sure. Just get sucked up by some of the bedding. So the worms look like they're okay, even though it might not have been the sort of experience that they were hoping to have today. It didn't seem like it caused them any harm. Nice batch of red wiggler worms out of my outdoor worm system. And these actually originally came out of my outdoor compost barrel. So it's kind of cool that I was able to sort of harvest these out of my yard in a way, because I never added worms to that compost barrel. The worms just made their way into it on their own. So I think there's only one thing remaining, just to get these little guys into their new home. So let's get that taken care of, and then we're done. Okay, well, we finally made it to this point. It's taken me quite a long time, a lot much more time than I I've got to admit, I was getting kind of caught up in what I was doing there when I was skimming through the container and sifting through and picking out material, and I don't know, it was just almost therapeutic. It was kind of relaxing, so I can't say that I'm annoyed by the amount of time it took. I'm just a little surprised at how much time it took. I guess I'm a little surprised at how much I enjoyed it too, because it is fun. But we're at that time now where we're going to release these worms. It will once again give us an opportunity to see how many there are, and at this point we know how many there are as far as their weight is concerned, but we still don't have an exact number on their count, and there's really no way of knowing unless we were to start counting them one by one, which is virtually impossible. But a lot of times this is the one opportunity where we feel like we do get the best view of the overall amount of worms that we've got. So let's check them out for one last time just before they all squirm down into their new home. So here we go. We've got a couple left behind in the container, but not too many. Let's make sure we didn't lose any. Alright, we got them all. Good deal. So we're going to spread them out a little bit so that none of them are obscured from getting right down into the new bedding of their new home. So they'll probably be out of view in a couple minutes. So let's let them relax, get accustomed to their new home, and then we'll be done. Man, those birds up there are making a lot of noise. They must be able to see what's going on down here. Well, this is about fast forward about 10 minutes here. So I just figured at this point it's a done deal. I just want to put this cover on here and let these little guys finally relax. You know, they've had quite a day. And I've had quite a day too, so I'm pretty much toast. I've still got a whole bunch of editing to do once this is all put away and cleaned up. But, you know, putting things away and cleaning things up is boring, so I'm not going to take up your time with that. So I'll just take this as a quick opportunity to say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.